is our entire church is basically stopping everything that we're doing as far as like our sermon series, even our series where we're going through the Bible. We're going to take a pause for 2 weeks because all of us are going to talk about racism and the issues that our country and our society is facing right now. I know for us, we kind of started this conversation a couple of weeks ago, both on Wednesday. We had the special Wednesday. We've been doing a couple of videos with the high schoolers. But I want to dedicate an entire week from this Sunday through next Sunday and beyond, but especially this entire 8 days are going to be dedicated to this conversation because it's a really, really important conversation. So I wanted to start off with just kind of telling my story. And some of you guys know some of these things, some of you don't. So, I was born in 1980, so I turned 40 this year, which sounds really old, probably to you even more than it sounds to me. But the funny, and I don't know, like, if you guys have talked about this with your parents, about how they grew up, but the reality, so I was born in 1980, so that means in 1989, I was 9 years old. So now some of you guys that are only a couple years after 9 years old, you can probably remember all of this. I don't remember those first 9 years as much as I remember the 90s. So I would say I count myself a child of the 90s. I mean, that's when I was in middle school and high school and college, and all of that was through the 90s. So I'm considered the very end of Generation X, which means that my parents are boomers. They're kind of the end of the boomers too. They were born in like 1951. So they were actually seniors in high school in 1969. So my dad, as I understand, throughout the 60s is, and I don't know how much you guys know about the 1960s, but there was a lot going on, and I think we only tend to remember like hippies. I think that's maybe the thing that we think about from the 60s. And the reality is, I think it sounds like my mom was maybe like a wannabe hippie. Like she did have the long hair and the flowers and all that sort of stuff like that. My dad, on the other hand, was a surfer. And surf culture was really big in the 50s and the 60s. So that was kind of their experience. And then again, I grew up in the 90s. So for me, I went to a pretty small school that was a K through 8. One building was all 9 years. And I think, and I don't know the specific numbers, but I think each grade had about 50 students, maybe less. So pretty small, especially those of you guys that go to El Roble or really almost any school I guess not homeschool, that's probably smaller, but you know what I mean. It's small compared to a lot of your experience. So in my school in Irvine, California, which is South Orange County, for most of those K through 8, I had 2 black kids that were in my school. We had Teresa and Marcus, and then in 6th grade, Marquise, who was another a black guy, he moved into our school. So we had 3 black students in our grade, and not many more in 7th or 6th grade, like when I was in 8th grade. So for me, growing up, again, 50 kids, 3 of them were black. I never saw Marcus or Marquise as any different than me, So I just kind of assumed that racism was a thing of the past, right? Because I didn't treat Marcus any differently. I didn't even look at Marcus. I mean, I literally grew up with this guy, and I didn't look at him as any different than me. So I certainly wouldn't use the word racist or anything like that. And I mean, of course I'd heard jokes and people would kind of snicker about, like different words, or, you would hear like a very inflammatory song. I really liked, I still do, like Guns N' Roses, and there's a lot of pretty racially charged songs that they sing. So I would hear those things and just kind of like, yeah, I mean, you would know these things that you weren't supposed to say, but it's still not racist, right? We wouldn't use that word racist. So for me, as a big movie fan, like I saw lots of movies growing up, and I read books, and I heard stories, like all of these things, like those of you guys that have seen the movie Glory, we watched that in 8th grade about the first black regiment in the Civil War. Cool Runnings is about Jamaican black bobsledders. What else is there? Time to Kill is one of my favorite movies about the black and white tensions. Remember the Titans, like on and on and on. There's lots and lots of these movies dealing with race, and even books, like reading, any of you that read To Kill a Mockingbird or stuff like that, you would hear these stories and read these things, but they all seemed so far away. They all seemed like them. It never seemed like me. And then same thing, like, so those of you guys that know Judy, my wife Judy is black. And when we started dating and then got married, not only is she black, but obviously her family on her dad's side is black. So for me, interacting not only with Judy, but then with her entire family, and her dad does have a very large family. So interacting with that, they are very different, and they have very different family gatherings. But to be honest, I kind of assumed that was more on my family side, that my family was more on the dull side, rather than them being that different. But that's okay, right? I'm still not racist. I'm just different than they are. And so my thing that I've said, like, a lot of times, to be honest with you, is that I don't even see color, right? People are all, and maybe you guys have said that or thought that, people are all the same. I don't even see differences, yeah. And the tough part, and this is something in talking about it with Judy, and because Judy has never liked when I say that phrase, and obviously that I don't keep saying that after she pointed that out, but it's still in there. But she said that really, if you think about it, what I'm saying by saying I don't see color or I don't see race is basically, I'm really saying everybody's just like me, or everybody's the same as being white. And the reality is, if you think about that, not only is that not fair to invalidate or ignore other people's culture, but also it's pretty ignorant of the differences that I face versus things that Judy faces just because of the color of her skin. And for some of you, again, we might not think about that. We might not realize that there is actually a difference in experience. But the one that struck me, our first church where we first started dating, is this church called Rock Harbor in Orange County. And Rock Harbor is a pretty large church. Its sanctuary sits about 900 to 950 people. They do 6 different services, so you're talking about 4,000 or 5,000 people. And Judy told me one time, in this room of 950 people, she would be the only person who looked like herself. And that's true. Literally in a church of 5,000 to 6,000 people, we had maybe 6 black people there. So Judy knew in that room she would be the only one with her skin color. And that might not sound like a big deal, but it's imagine that that's reversed. Imagine that that's you as a white person, or not a black person at least, sitting in a room of all 99% black people, and you're the only white face in there. Is that going to feel a little different? Another analogy that she made is that, think about if you're a boy and you attended an all-girls school. Or if you're a girl and you attended an all-boys school, so you're the only boy or the only girl there. That'd be quite a experience, right? And the reality is, I can maybe imagine what that's like, but I don't know what that feels like. That's not my experience of my life. Where I go, most people have the same skin color as me. And again, so much to the fact that I don't even think about that, but that's a reality that I think right now we need to be aware of. Because something that we're talking about, and they're talking about it in the adult service as well, is the fact that we all have blind spots. We have areas that we just are unaware of and don't know about. And either we don't care, or we're just ignorant of it. We just don't even know that that's a thing. And then I think the reality is, now, don't get me wrong, none of us are experts on other people. So it would be ridiculous to assume that I know everything about Caleb or about Kennedy or about Jonathan or about any of you guys to say, hey, I've got you 100% figured out. Like, no, I don't know what's going on inside your brain. I don't know what your 100% experiences are. So there's a certain level of that should be just across the board. But the challenge becomes when someone's experience is very different than mine, then how do I understand? And I understand by listening, learning, and empathizing. Like, I want to understand. So like right now, as we're talking about what's going on with the protests and everything going on, Black Lives Matter, and all of that energy and anger that's going on, I think that's where we need to start. Why? Why is this going on? So there's actually a video, and I would encourage you guys. They're gonna show this video in its full during the adult service, I should say. And what Pastor Don did this week is he set up a Zoom call with Judy's dad, because Judy's dad is actually a black pastor from Indiana, and just asked him some of these questions. So I picked a couple of these questions that I wanted us to look at before we continue.
Can you give us your perspective on what is happening in our nation across these last few weeks in terms of race and kind of the division and the reconciliation that's maybe needed there? But what's your perspective on that?
It's really an expression of the frustration. There is an immense amount of frustration. I think it's the pandemic. It's the high levels of unemployment and just the blatant systemic racism that was seen in the video. That is, we always thought that maybe if we had cameras, people would behave differently on camera. Mm-hmm. And there for almost 8 minutes, this police officer, with people challenging him to change his behavior, and he didn't. It's a level of anger and frustration that's here. This is an outbreak of that. I understand it. I think it's the great hope of the Obama years, and then to see the deterioration of that by some of these younger people. They're different. They're different than our generation that went through the civil rights movement, that believed in peaceful pushing of the systems. This younger group is not for that. They're looking for structural change in how we do what we do.
And so a high percentage of our church were white, and it's difficult for us sometimes to understand what systemic racism is like. We don't experience that. So do you have any sort of personal experiences of this systemic racism that could help us to kind of understand what that's like a little bit?
I give the analogy of systemic racism. It's like the fish is the last one to discover water. That they live in an environment that the water environment for the fish is just the way it is. And for the majority of people of our nation, the system, the way this works, is just part of the way it is. It has always been that way. It feels comfortable. One of my favorite stories I give is when in 1995, I started working at Moody Bible Institute. And during the summer, I decided to move into my office, before school started. It was in August, early August, before Faculty Institute and the rest. And I'm carrying in and out boxes, and emptying them out and taking the boxes back to my car to take them home to fill in more stuff, books and computer stuff. And as I'm moving my stuff in and out, someone called security on me. Mm-hmm. So 3 security guards show up, wondering who am I, what am I doing, and I'm a faculty member here. It was just assumed that if there was a black man moving boxes in and out of a building, it had to be something criminal. And that's just one of many stories. And most African American men of my age, over 16 or 17, 18 years old, have a story of just being judged, being followed in a jewelry store, or not understood as the leader or the boss at their job. And this is part of that. It's just assumed that, oh, they can't be doing something legal. It's the assumption, even in these protests, that all of these people protesting are hooligans and violent, and where there's a very small majority of the people that are protesting are actually breaking the law and looting and doing the rest. But it's just it's how we look at the news. It's the pictures they portray, the people they interview on the news about the situation. They want to pick people that support a view that of discrimination and prejudice. And I think that we're going to have to come to grips with the reality that there is such thing as racism and systemic racism, that there is a sense of white privilege, and I'm not using that in a negative way. I'm saying that sociologists will tell you that if you're a white male over the age of 45, you just are treated better in our society than somebody who's a minority or is younger or is a woman. All of these are just part of the way it is. Now, it's not right.
Right.
And what's most frustrating for me is that the church, we shouldn't see this at church. I shouldn't have to experience this at Moody Bible Institute.
Right.
You know what I mean? You think of all the places, they have black professors working here. They have black administrators here. D.L. Moody had minorities in the school in the 1800s. It shouldn't be this way. But then you're bumped into it all the time, even among our Christian institutions.
So again, the rest of that interview, I think they're going to show the whole thing during the adult service, if you guys want to watch that. And I don't know about you guys, but like that's kind of tough to hear. I mean, maybe tough to hear is the wrong word, but just that reality that it's just like, man, that's a tough reality, right? And the fact too that, and that's what we'll talk about on Wednesday, every single black person in the United States has a story like that. And that's chilling. That's painful. Where it's just like, this is not something that we can just turn a blind eye to, or just say like, well, it's not really a problem. It is a problem. And there's the two things that I want to talk about today is kind of what Pastor Bob talked about. Is the first one is this idea of systemic racism. And what that is, and he kind of talked about what that is. I love that analogy of a fish understanding water, is that the systems that we have in our country, in our world, in our culture, the systems naturally favor one group over another. And we've talked about this, obviously, like with the idea of wealth. I think we all know that, is that our system totally favors the people who have money more than the people who don't have money. If you can afford to get a very expensive lawyer, then you will probably get a more favorable settlement in court. If you can pay enough money for fines, you don't have to go to jail. If you have enough money, you can buy a nicer, fancier car or a fancier home or live in a nicer neighborhood. All of these things are favored towards the wealthy. So the challenge is this system that actually favors race. That's a far deeper and more troubling system. And the thing too that I want to encourage you guys, because I know you guys are on your phones and on Google and on the internet, look up some of these things. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure you'll see plenty of things that talk about systemic racism as a myth and then doesn't exist and stuff like that. Those opinions are out there. But if you look for a lot of the facts about the educational system, about the percentages of white people that succeed in education versus black people that succeed. You look at like business, the number of CEOs versus white versus black. You look at professional sports. I mean, that's been a big challenge. Look at the number of managers and owners and general managers, all of those things of white versus black. Even though, I mean, that's the crazy thing. You look at the NBA, and don't get me wrong, I love basketball. How much, like, what percentage of players are black? Extremely high. What percentage of owners are black? What percentage of managers are black? Not high. And that's troubling. This came up in the NBA a couple of years ago when my team, the Clippers, were owned by a guy named Donald Sterling, who the challenging part was we found out, or at least found out, everyone had kind of known that he was racist. Like, that was just kind of a thing that we just kind of like, oh, but just kind of, don't talk about him. Just let him go. And he got caught on tape saying some very racist things. And so finally the NBA stepped in and said, like, okay, we got to take action here. Which, great, finally you took some action. But it was a bummer that it took that long. So one thing, and we're going long here, so I want to get to these things. One thing that is I want to talk specifically about is our justice system. Because our justice system, if anything, we talk about justice should be blind, justice should be blind. It shouldn't matter what color you are, how wealthy you are. Justice is justice, right? But one, and I found this video. It's only like 20 seconds. So I just want to show you guys. There's this documentary we'll talk about in a couple of minutes that is about the prison system or the justice system. And one shot that they put is lists of unarmed black men who have been shot by police. And so here's this real quick. So that should be a pretty tough image for us to look at right there. Unarmed black victims killed by police. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm sure there are scenarios, because you can look at like unarmed white people or Latino people that are killed by police. I'm sure there are situations that do warrant that. But that list, like, there's something that's not balanced about that. And they even said, like statistically, and this number got me. If you are a black male, you have a 1 out of 3 chance of spending time in jail. 1 out of every 3 black males in the United States will spend time in jail. If you are white, you have a 1 out of 17 chance of spending time in jail. Like, that number is crazy. Just because of the color of your skin, you have that. There is a five times more likely to be killed by a police officer if you are black and unarmed. And then this is another one that I just saw the statistics. In 2015, there was 104 unarmed black men that were shot and killed by the police. Of those 104 killings, there were only 13 that charges were pressed. And of those 13 charges in 104 killings, there were only 4 convictions. Like, that's crazy. That if I'm black and I see that and I hear that, I have got to be angry. I have got to say there's no way that that's fair. If that number was like, only 50% of them or only 40%, but when it's 13 and only 4 convictions, yeah, that's where the system is out to get me. So I want to talk more about this, and we'll talk more about this in the week to come. But the other one, because this is the one that I really want to hit because it's the tough one, is that's the system. That the system, and I'm not saying that all police are bad. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about that the system that has been built clearly is unbalanced. The second part is maybe harder because the second one is about me. The second one is about us. The second one is about what's inside here. Because this one's much harder. This is not about bashing on the system or bashing on the police or them. It's about me. Because if I'm really honest, and this maybe it's just me. I kind of don't think so, but just maybe it's just me. But if I'm really honest, if I see a black man in a hooded sweatshirt or wearing a tank top, that feels different to me than if I saw a white man with a hooded sweatshirt or a tank top. If it's late at night and I'm walking down the street or I'm in front of a 7-Eleven or something like that, and I see a black man in a hooded sweatshirt walk up to the store, I feel different. And that's the issue right there. If I see a group of white teenagers together, that feels different than a group of black teenagers together. And that's what we're talking about. Do we call that racism? Does that mean I am a racist? I mean, I think that word has been so damaging because, like, racism, we think about, like, the Nazis and we think about the KKK and the white power and all that sort of stuff like that. But let's just start with that feeling that is the problem. And that's what needs to be addressed. And I love, and that's what we're talking about, like, that's where the church comes in. That's where the Holy Spirit comes in, because that's changing me. That's not changing the systems, that's changing me. So, as we're ending here, what I want us to do this week, and I mentioned this at the top, an email is going to go out in a couple of minutes, or I'm not exactly sure when. Sometime this afternoon, there's going to be an email that's sent out to the entire church. And there are sections of this email that are specifically designed for different groups to interact. Because what we need to have happen here, and I mean we as in humanity, what we need to have happen is this can't just stay with this video that we're watching right now. This has to be something that you guys talk about with your parents and with your brothers and your sisters and your aunts and your uncles. This has to be you guys as a family talking about this and saying, Mom, what do you think about this? Dad, this is what I think about this. So in this email, what it says is that if you are between, and you guys don't have to follow these specific guidelines. This is just something to kind of get the ball rolling. But what we put in there is that if you're between the ages of 9 and 12, so that would be like a 6th or a 7th grader, or I guess, yeah. Okay, if you're a 6th or a 7th grader, the suggestion, or either read a book on racial injustice, and there's a list of great books in there. There's like Brown Girl Dreaming is a really popular one, or watch a movie dealing with racial injustice. So I recommended like Hidden Figures, was nominated for an Oscar a couple of years ago. Queen of Katwe is another great one. Watch or read a book and then talk with your parents about systemic racism. What is systemic racism? Where have I seen it? What is the difference in my experience versus black people that I either know or don't know? And then the third one is talk about what do you do? Because a big conversation now is it's not enough just not to be racist. We have to be anti-racist. We have to like hear people make a joke or hear people like say an inappropriate comment and we have to say no more. This stops. But how do you do that? Your friends make a joke at somebody's expense. What do you say? How do you do that? Talk about that as a family. And then the other one, which again, you guys can overlap if you feel like one fits you better. But I put for teenagers, so especially for 8th graders and high schoolers, there's some really challenging documentaries about race on Netflix, on a bunch of different things. The one that I showed you guys that clip from is called 13th, which is about the 13th Amendment ending slavery, and it's about the prison system. It's brutal. It's a tough documentary, but if you guys are teenagers, like you guys can handle it. You guys have seen way worse, unfortunately. There's also one about the black teens that were accused of rape, wrongly accused, called When They See Us. And then there's one about the LA riots called LA 92. So watch one of those documentaries and then talk with your parents about watch it together and then talk with them about that. And then the other ones, talk to them about the protests. Like, why are they happening? How are people reacting to them? How do you feel? Like, what are their goals? Why are they doing, like, what's the end, like, what are they hoping to accomplish? And then most of all, this is the biggest one. Most of all, you gotta care. Because if you guys are anything like me, and I think I said this before, and it's been sticking with me ever since. When I was in 7th grade was when the LA riots happened, 1992. And I remember watching that on television and just kind of going like, wow, that's crazy, like fires and whatever. And again, I don't remember the protests. I only remember the riots. And my thought was, that's crazy, but it doesn't affect me. I live in Irvine. I'm not a racist. Like, I'm just 12. Why would anybody listen to me? And the reality is, especially right now with what's going on, people will absolutely listen to you. If right now you decide, hey, this is too far, I'm going to take a stand, and not so much like because you guys are racists, but if you're going to take a stand and say, hey, I want to change, people will absolutely listen to you right now. And not only that, but the reality is, if you guys don't take a stand, if you guys just go, wow, that's crazy, but it doesn't really affect me, like maybe when I'm, 25, 35, 45, that's me. And for 25 years, that's what I've thought. And sure, it's been in the back of my head. I've watched these movies and I've been like, dang, that is horrible. But I've never spoken up. I've never done anything. I've never stood there and said, like, no more. And I don't want that for you guys. Like, this has to end. Like, the one thing that I've been trying to not text out, but like, not tweet, but whatever I do, post out, is just that, like, the hashtag no more. Because that's the thing of just like Noah just said, 40% is way too high about just like how many unarmed black people, how many, like, if nothing else, there is an entire segment of our population, some of which you know, some of which you don't know, that are hurting right now. And as Christ followers, as human beings, we can't turn a blind eye to that. We can't just say, oh, well. But we can't do that. We got to stand up. So, yeah, I'll hop on the Zoom for a while if you guys want to talk about this or whatever. Again, stay tuned for Wednesday because I'm really excited. We're going to have Nathan, who's one of our high schoolers who's black. He'll come and kind of share some of his stories. Judy's going to pop in and try and share some of her stories because I think that's the most important thing right now. We have to listen and we have to learn. Even before we do anything, we have to first see what it is that we don't know. So let me pray for us and then, we can dive in. Father, thank you for this morning. And thank you for the chance. Thank you for this season that people are listening and that I'm listening and that you've put this on my heart. And I pray that this would be on our hearts, that we would see those that are hurting and want to help. Help us see the hurting and help us see how we can help. We love you. We thank you. In Jesus' name, amen.